Hello and welcome. If you're reading this, you are probably eager to speak English more naturally and confidently. Many learners spend years studying grammar, memorizing vocabulary, and doing exercises, yet their speech often sounds stiff, unnatural, or translated from their first language. This can make conversations frustrating, slow, or even discouraging. In this story, we will follow the journey of Sophie, an ambitious English learner who wanted to sound like a native speaker, not just someone who knows English. Through her experiences, we'll explore the strategies, techniques, and daily habits that help learners speak more fluently, naturally, and confidently. Each part of this story will focus on key elements that contribute to natural English: pronunciation, rhythm, vocabulary choice, idioms, cultural context, listening, speaking habits, and more. Sophie's journey begins in her home city, where she worked at a multinational company. Although she could read and write English well, she often hesitated in meetings, struggled to find the right words in casual conversations, and felt self-conscious about her accent and phrasing. She realized that sounding natural in English is about more than grammar. It's about how language flows, feels, and is used in context. Throughout this story, you'll see how Sophie learned to think in English, use expressions naturally, adjust intonation, and communicate like a confident speaker. Each chapter will combine her personal experiences with actionable strategies and exercises that you can apply in your own English learning journey. From learning to link words smoothly to choosing vocabulary that native speakers actually use, Sophie's journey will guide you step by step toward natural, authentic English. You'll see the mistakes she made, the insights she gained, and the habits that transformed her speech from hesitant and robotic to fluent and engaging. By following Sophie's story, you'll discover practical ways to develop natural rhythm, intonation, and expression, avoid awkward phrasing, and gain confidence in both casual and professional contexts. Each chapter builds on the previous one, showing that natural English is a skill you can develop gradually with practice and awareness. So, let's begin Sophie's journey. The first lesson starts with the foundational step to sounding natural: listening actively and observing how native speakers express themselves. By paying attention to flow, intonation, and word choice, Sophie began her transformation from hesitant learner to natural English speaker. After Sophie's realization that grammar and vocabulary alone weren't enough, she discovered the power of active listening. Listening to native speakers, not just hearing them, was the first step towards sounding natural. She noticed that native speakers didn't speak in perfectly structured textbook sentences. Instead, they used contractions, pauses, emphasis, and rhythm that made English flow naturally. One morning at work, Sophie observed a colleague, Daniel, during a team discussion. He said, "I've been thinking, maybe we could try a different approach." She noticed the small pauses, the casual tone, and the use of maybe and could to soften suggestions. Compared to her own speech, which often sounded rigid and rehearsed, Daniel's English flowed effortlessly. Sophie began mimicking conversations silently, focusing on rhythm, intonation, and natural expressions. For example, instead of saying, "I am going to finish the project by tomorrow," she learned to say, "I'll finish the project by tomorrow," which sounded more casual and natural. She also started listening to podcasts, interviews, and TV shows, paying attention to how speakers link words, reduce sounds, and stress certain words for meaning. She noticed phrases like gonna instead of going to, wanna instead of want to, and subtle reductions like did you, sounding like Jew. At first, it felt strange, but gradually, these patterns became intuitive. Another technique Sophie used was shadowing. She played short clips, paused, and repeated exactly what she heard, matching pronunciation, stress, and intonation. This not only improved her accent but also trained her ear and mouth to work together, making her speech more natural. Sophie realized that active listening wasn't about understanding every single word. It was about catching the rhythm, tone, and patterns of everyday English. She could then internalize these patterns and reproduce them in her own speech. Finally, Sophie combined listening with observation of body language and facial expressions. She noticed how native speakers emphasize certain words with gestures, smiles, or head nods. This helped her understand how tone and nonverbal cues contribute to natural communication. Through active listening and observation, Sophie began speaking with greater confidence, smoother rhythm, and natural expression. She learned that sounding natural isn't about memorizing phrases. It's about absorbing patterns, practicing them, and letting them guide your speech. In the next part, we'll explore Sophie's journey in using contractions, linking, and reductions, another essential step toward natural-sounding English. After Sophie had focused on active listening, she realized another crucial element of natural English: the way words are connected in speech. Textbook English often emphasizes full words and careful pronunciation, but native speakers rarely speak this way. Instead, they use contractions, link words smoothly, and reduce sounds, creating a natural flow that sounds effortless. Sophie noticed this during a morning coffee break. Her colleague Emma said, "I'm gonna grab a coffee. Do you want one?" At first, Sophie didn't recognize gonna as going to, but she realized that these reductions and contractions made speech quicker and more conversational. By mimicking this, Sophie could sound less stiff and more like a native speaker. She practiced contractions such as, "I'm your Dave," and "we'll," and learned to link words together. For example, instead of saying, "I will go to the office," she began saying, "I'll go to the office," blending the words naturally. This small adjustment dramatically improved the rhythm of her speech. Sophie also focused on reduced forms of common phrases. She learned that "did you" often becomes "you," "want to" becomes "wanna," and "let me" sounds like "lemme." These reductions sounded informal and casual, but they made English more authentic and easier to understand. To practice, Sophie used shadowing exercises with dialogues from TV shows and podcasts. She played short segments and repeated them immediately, imitating not just the words but also the speed, stress, and melody of native speakers. This helped her internalize the natural flow of English, rather than producing choppy, robotic sentences. She also recorded herself reading aloud with and without reductions, comparing the difference. She noticed that her speech felt smoother and more connected when she applied contractions and linking. Even colleagues at work commented that her English sounded more natural and confident. Another helpful strategy was to listen for unstressed words. Words like a, the, and to often get less emphasis in natural speech. Sophie practiced softening these words while emphasizing the important content words, which helped her sound more fluent and authentic. Through consistent practice, Sophie began speaking English with rhythm, speed, and melody similar to native speakers. She learned that contractions, linking, and reductions aren't just optional, they're essential for sounding natural, fluent, and confident in everyday conversation. In the next part, we'll explore Sophie's journey in choosing vocabulary and phrases that native speakers actually use, another key to sounding natural in English. After mastering contractions, linking, and reductions, Sophie realized that vocabulary choice plays a huge role in sounding natural. Many learners rely on formal, textbook expressions that are grammatically correct but feel stiff in everyday conversation. Sophie wanted to speak in a way that felt real and spontaneous, like a native speaker. During a team meeting, she noticed her colleague Jake often said, "Let's grab lunch," instead of, "Shall we go to have lunch?" The difference was subtle but significant. The first phrase was casual, friendly, and natural, while the second sounded formal and awkward. Sophie realized that to sound natural, she needed to observe the words and phrases people actually use in daily conversation. Sophie started by listening to authentic English, podcasts, YouTube videos, and casual conversations among native speakers. She noted which expressions appeared frequently in informal and professional contexts. She discovered that phrases like, "hang out, catch up, give it a shot," and "kind of" were common in spoken English, while formal textbook alternatives were rarely used. To integrate these expressions, Sophie created a phrase journal. Whenever she encountered a natural expression, she wrote it down with examples of how it was used. She reviewed the journal regularly and practiced using the phrases in her own speech, both in casual chats and work-related conversations. She also learned to adapt vocabulary to context. For instance, in a professional email, she used slightly more formal expressions. "I'd like to discuss our next steps." But in a casual chat with colleagues, she might say, "Let's figure out what's next." This flexibility made her speech sound authentic, confident, and appropriate in different settings. Another strategy Sophie used was paraphrasing. Instead of translating ideas directly from her native language, she learned to express thoughts using natural English expressions, even if the words were different. This helped her avoid awkward, literal translations and made her speech smoother and more fluid. Sophie also practiced role-playing real-life scenarios. By simulating conversations at the cafe, office, or social gatherings, she could experiment with natural phrases and vocabulary, receive feedback from friends, and refine her speech until it felt effortless. Over time, Sophie noticed that choosing natural vocabulary and phrases made her sound more confident and approachable. People understood her easily, and her conversations flowed without hesitation. She realized that sounding natural in English is not just about grammar and pronunciation, it's about speaking in a way that feels genuine and culturally appropriate. In the next part, we'll explore Sophie's journey in developing natural intonation and stress patterns, another essential element of fluent, authentic English. After improving her vocabulary and expressions, Sophie realized that intonation and stress patterns were crucial for sounding natural. She had noticed that even when her words and grammar were correct, her speech sometimes sounded flat or robotic, making her conversations less engaging. During a casual meeting, Sophie observed her colleague, Mia, explaining a project update. Mia emphasized certain words, paused strategically, and varied her pitch throughout the sentences. Her speech had a musical rhythm, which made it easier to understand and pleasant to listen to. Sophie realized that intonation conveys meaning, emotion, and emphasis, and mastering it would make her English sound more authentic. Sophie began practicing sentence stress, emphasizing the most important words in her sentences. For example, instead of saying, "I am going to the store to buy milk," with equal stress on every word, she practiced, "I am going to the store to buy milk." This highlighted key information and made her speech more natural and understandable. She also focused on rising and falling intonation. Rising intonation often indicates questions or uncertainty, while falling intonation signals statements or certainty. By mimicking native speakers' pitch patterns, Sophie could express subtle emotions, curiosity, and emphasis, adding depth to her conversations. Another technique Sophie used was recording herself reading aloud, paying attention to natural stress and intonation. She compared her recordings to native speakers and adjusted accordingly. Over time, she noticed that her speech sounded more dynamic, confident, and expressive. Sophie also practiced intonation in casual dialogues. She engaged in role-playing activities with friends, experimenting with how changing pitch and stress could alter meaning. For example, saying, "I really like this idea," with stress on "really," conveyed enthusiasm, while a flat delivery sounded indifferent. She learned that natural intonation and stress patterns are not just decorative, they help listeners understand meaning quickly, convey emotion, and make communication engaging. Ignoring these patterns can make even perfectly correct English sound unnatural or hard to follow. Through consistent practice, Sophie developed the ability to speak with melody, emphasis, and rhythm, which made her English conversations smoother, more persuasive, and enjoyable for both her and her listeners. In the next part, we'll explore Sophie's journey in using fillers and discourse markers naturally, which further enhances fluent and realistic speech. As Sophie honed her intonation and stress patterns, she realized another important aspect of natural English: the use of fillers and discourse markers. While many learners view fillers like or as mistakes to avoid, Sophie discovered that when used correctly, they make speech sound more fluent and natural. During a casual conversation with her friend Alex, Sophie noticed how he naturally said, "Well, I think maybe we could try a different approach." The "well" at the start and the pause after, "I think," didn't indicate uncertainty. Instead, they gave him time to organize his thoughts and made his speech sound more conversational. Sophie began practicing fillers strategically. She learned that small pauses and soft words like, "Well, so you know, actually," or "I mean," can help maintain the flow of speech, signal transitions, and make ideas easier to process for listeners. She also observed how native speakers link discourse markers to the structure of conversation. For example, "Anyway, let's move on," signals a topic change, while, "by the way," introduces new information naturally. Using these markers appropriately made Sophie's conversations smooth, organized, and engaging. To practice, Sophie recorded herself speaking about familiar topics and intentionally included natural fillers where she would normally pause or hesitate. Over time, these pauses became fluid and unnoticeable, creating a rhythm that mimicked real-life conversations. Sophie also combined fillers with intonation and stress practice. For instance, she noticed that emphasizing certain words around a filler could convey subtle meaning. "Well, I really think this is important," conveyed both thoughtfulness and emphasis. Another key insight was that overusing fillers can be distracting, while avoiding them completely can make speech sound stiff. Sophie learned to balance their use, making her speech sound spontaneous without appearing unsure or unprepared. By mastering fillers and discourse markers, Sophie's English began to sound fluid, natural, and closer to native-like conversation. Listeners found her speech more relatable, and she herself felt more confident and less self-conscious during conversations. In the next part, we'll explore Sophie's journey in thinking in English rather than translating from her native language, a vital step toward truly natural communication. As Sophie practiced fillers and discourse markers, she realized that translation from her native language was one of the biggest barriers to sounding natural. For years, she had been constructing sentences in her head in her first language and then converting them into English. While this approach helped her avoid major grammar mistakes, it often made her speech slow, awkward, and unnatural. One afternoon, Sophie tried explaining a simple idea to a colleague. "I think we should start with the easiest task first." In her head, she had translated word for word from her native language, which caused her to hesitate, stumble, and add unnecessary words. She realized that thinking directly in English would make her speech smoother and more confident. Sophie started small. She began narrating her daily activities in English in her mind, describing things she saw, what she was doing, or her thoughts. For example, while walking to work, she thought, "The sun is shining, and the streets are busy today." Gradually, this internal English narration helped her build mental fluency. She also practiced thinking in phrases and chunks rather than individual words. Instead of translating word by word, she learned to think in natural English expressions. "I need to finish this report," rather than, "I have to complete this report," translated literally. This shift reduced hesitation and made speech more spontaneous. Another technique Sophie used was speaking out loud to herself without planning the sentences in her native language. She described what she was doing, voiced opinions on articles she read, or explained concepts to an imaginary friend. This helped her train her brain to process English directly, bypassing the translation step. Sophie also immersed herself in English conversations, podcasts, and videos, paying attention to how native speakers structure thoughts naturally. By absorbing sentence patterns and expressions, she internalized English logic and phrasing rather than forcing her native language framework onto it. Over time, Sophie noticed a significant change. She could speak more fluidly, with fewer pauses, corrections, or awkward constructions. Thinking in English allowed her to respond immediately, sound more natural, and engage confidently in conversations. By mastering this skill, Sophie moved closer to authentic, native-like communication, making all her previous efforts, intonation, stress, fillers, vocabulary, more effective. In the next part, we'll explore Sophie's journey in practicing with native speakers and real-life interactions, which solidified her natural English skills. After learning to think directly in English, Sophie realized that real practice with native speakers was essential. No amount of listening, shadowing, or self-practice could fully replicate the dynamics of live conversation. To sound natural, she needed to interact, respond, and adjust in real time. Sophie started joining language exchange meetups and online conversation groups. At first, she felt nervous, worrying about making mistakes or not being understood. However, she quickly discovered that native speakers were patient, supportive, and often helped her improve by modeling natural responses. One day, during a group discussion about weekend plans, Sophie hesitated and said, "I think, maybe I go to the park." Her conversation partner gently corrected her. "Oh, you mean, I think I'll go to the park." Sophie realized that small adjustments make a big difference in sounding natural. She also observed the natural pace, gestures, and expressions native speakers used, which textbooks never taught her. Sophie began incorporating real-life vocabulary, idioms, and phrasal verbs into her conversations. Instead of rigidly saying, "I am going to eat at a restaurant," she learned to say, "I'm grabbing a bite," or "I'm heading out for lunch." These subtle changes made her English more conversational and relatable. She also practiced asking follow-up questions, giving feedback, and using small talk naturally. In casual chats, she learned to say things like, "That's interesting. How did that go?" instead of generic, stiff responses. This interaction style helped her sound engaged, friendly, and confident. Another valuable technique was listening for correction without judgment. Sophie realized that native speakers often provide subtle hints, like repeating her sentence with correct phrasing or adding natural expressions. Instead of feeling embarrassed, she embraced these moments as learning opportunities. Sophie's confidence grew as she immersed herself in real conversations. She practiced not only in professional contexts but also in social settings, cafes, community events, and online discussions. Each interaction reinforced her fluency, rhythm, and authentic expression, helping her integrate everything she had learned. Through consistent practice with native speakers, Sophie began thinking, responding, and expressing herself naturally, without overanalyzing or translating. Her English finally flowed with confidence, spontaneity, and authenticity. In the next part, we'll explore Sophie's journey in handling mistakes and self-correction gracefully, which is crucial for maintaining natural and confident speech. As Sophie gained confidence speaking English with native speakers, she encountered another important lesson: mistakes are inevitable, and learning to handle them gracefully is key to sounding natural. Many learners hesitate, pause excessively, or restart sentences whenever they make an error. This approach not only disrupts fluency but also makes speech sound unnatural and self-conscious. During a virtual team meeting, Sophie was explaining a project idea when she suddenly forgot a word. In the past, she would have panicked, paused for several seconds, and tried to reconstruct her sentence. But now she calmly said, "I mean," and rephrased her thought without losing rhythm or confidence. Her colleagues barely noticed the slip. Sophie realized that how you respond to mistakes matters more than avoiding them completely. She learned to use natural self-corrections. Instead of stopping abruptly, she practiced continuing the sentence, rephrasing naturally, or adding clarifying phrases. For example, saying, "I was thinking, I thought we could try a different approach," keeps the conversation flowing while correcting the error subtly. Another strategy Sophie adopted was laughing lightly or showing ease with small mistakes. This approach made her sound relaxed, confident, and human, rather than anxious or rigid. Native speakers often do this, and it contributes to natural, engaging communication. Sophie also recognized the importance of learning from mistakes without self-criticism. Each slip was an opportunity to notice patterns, improve vocabulary, or refine pronunciation. By adopting a positive mindset toward errors, she reduced anxiety and increased her willingness to speak spontaneously. Additionally, she practiced predictive phrasing and sentence planning. Anticipating common expressions or phrases in advance helped her minimize hesitation, but she remained flexible enough to self-correct naturally when needed. This balance between preparation and spontaneity made her speech smooth, natural, and authentic. Through consistent practice, Sophie realized that mistakes don't prevent natural speech, they are part of the learning process. Embracing errors, correcting them gracefully, and maintaining rhythm and intonation allowed her English to sound effortless and fluent. By mastering this skill, Sophie prepared herself for the final stage of her journey, achieving overall naturalness and confidence in all aspects of spoken English, which we'll explore in the concluding part. After months of practice, Sophie reached the final stage of her journey, achieving overall naturalness and confidence in English. She had worked through active listening, contractions, linking, reductions, natural vocabulary, intonation, fillers, thinking in English, real-life practice, and graceful handling of mistakes. Now, she integrated all these skills to speak fluently, confidently, and naturally in any situation. Sophie noticed that her conversations flowed effortlessly. She could respond immediately, use idioms and phrasal verbs naturally, emphasize important words, and adjust tone and rhythm for clarity and engagement. Unlike before, she no longer paused to translate sentences in her head or overthink grammar rules. Her English sounded authentic, spontaneous, and engaging, and she felt proud and confident in her abilities. One day, Sophie was invited to give a short presentation at work. She applied everything she had learned: smooth linking of words, contractions, natural expressions, varied intonation, and subtle discourse markers. During the presentation, she made a minor slip but self-corrected gracefully. The audience responded positively, and her manager complimented her clear, natural, and professional communication. Sophie realized that confidence and authenticity were just as important as accuracy. Sophie's journey teaches a powerful lesson: sounding natural in English is a skill, not a talent. It requires practice, awareness, and consistent application of techniques. By listening actively, observing native patterns, practicing reductions, using real vocabulary, mastering intonation, incorporating fillers, thinking in English, interacting with native speakers, and handling mistakes with ease, anyone can speak English confidently and naturally. In conclusion, natural English is about more than just grammar or vocabulary. It's about rhythm, flow, expression, and confidence. Sophie's story demonstrates that with dedication, the right strategies, and real-life practice, learners can transform hesitant, textbook-like speech into fluent, authentic communication. If you follow Sophie's example, focus on communication rather than perfection, embrace mistakes as learning opportunities, and practice consistently, you too can sound more natural in English and enjoy every conversation with confidence.